I'm a recovering lawyer. Might as well get that out. And when I first came to IUPUI, I thought research was the kind of thing that you do. You know, you have a white lab coat, you have test tubes, and you do funny things with the test tubes, and that was research. Since then, I have come to realize that research means looking for the answer to questions that intrigue you. And in my case, given my background, those questions mostly boil down to one: how do we live together? What kinds of rules and institutions are most likely to allow very different people with very different values, talents, interests, and backgrounds to get along with each other? It's sort of the Rodney King question: can't we all get along? And obviously lately the answer is no. What sort of a system is likely to be fair to everybody? Before I came to IUPUI, I was the executive director of Indiana's ACLU, so it probably won't surprise anyone to know that I think the United States Constitution, and especially the Bill of Rights, is a pretty good basis for a fair society. Or that my research over the years is focused on civil rights and civil liberties. But my current research focus grew out of an experience I had in my classroom. When I teach law and public affairs, I begin with the way that the Constitution limits our policy options. You know, we might stop all crime if we locked everyone in their house all day, but probably we would violate a few constitutional provisions if we did that. So the Constitution limits our policy focus. So in order to use the Constitution as a policy lens, I usually start with the Constitution, the constitutional architecture, and early in the semester I get to original intent. And I usually ask, this is particularly my undergraduate class, I usually try to be kind of interactive. I say, okay, what do you think James Madison thought about porn on the internet? You know, and usually I get, you know, some of you are smiling. You know, I usually get a chuckle, and a student will usually say, well, I guess James Madison didn't think a whole lot about porn on the internet. And we say, no, but he did think a lot about free expression, the exchange of ideas, and the appropriate role of government, and the need to control the amount of censorship from government, that sort of thing. I asked this young woman, who was a junior in college, right here, with decent, if not wonderful grades, what do you think James Madison thought about porn on the internet? And she looked at me and she said, who's James Madison? I went home and I poured a really stiff drink and told my husband I was slitting my wrist. And when I sobered up, I did some research to see just how representative that student was. And I was appalled by what I found. Only 36% of Americans can correctly name the 3 branches of government. Fewer than half of 12th grade students can define federalism. Only 35% of teenagers can correctly identify "we the people" as the first 3 words of the Constitution. This one kills me. Nearly 94% of teenagers in one survey could name the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, whoever the hell that is. But only 2% could name the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Only 5% of high school seniors can identify and explain checks on presidential power. Only 43% of high school seniors can name the 2 major political parties. Only 11% know the length of a senator's term, and only 23% can name the first president of the United States. And I could go on. We took a family vacation several years ago with a friend who was very political, and we went out to dinner every night, and he would offer the server an extra $5 on the tip if the server could identify the 2 senators from his state. He never had to pay. That was South Carolina, in all fairness. Okay. You know, this stuff matters. I mean, it really does. For one thing, widespread civic ignorance explains an awful lot of the craziness and conflict that we see around us. People who have very little grasp of American history, who've never heard of the Enlightenment and don't know the role it played in our approach to government, are the people who are most easily mobilized by the demagogues who populate talk radio and television. They're the ones who believe that internet letter that your crazy Uncle Ed forwards to you every Thursday, you know. This is a country where increasingly people read different books and newspapers, visit different blogs, watch different television programs, attend different churches or mosques, and even speak different languages, where the information and beliefs that we all share are diminishing and our variety and diversity are growing. That makes it more important than ever that Americans understand our history and our governing philosophy, because our constitutional values are really the only things that all Americans have in common. They're what makes us we the people, rather than a bunch of quarreling constituencies and special interest groups contending for a limited pot of good. No one really knows why civic education in high schools isn't getting the job done, or why prior efforts to improve civic literacy and civics education haven't worked. We don't even know what counts as essential civic knowledge, what things citizens absolutely need to know in order to live successfully in the 21st century, although I have a book coming out in which I attempt to outline. Anyway, we don't know the extent to which our civic deficit has contributed to our increasingly toxic politics. 18 months ago, with the help of several colleagues, I established the Center for Civic Literacy here at IUPUI. It's an interdisciplinary effort to answer those and similar questions and to research the personal, political, and civic consequences of that civic deficit and the reasons that it persists. The center has a website, a blog, a newsletter, and an interdisciplinary academic journal publishing civics research, because we all know we really needed another academic journal. Anyway, we host an annual conference on the issue, and we've established a national advisory committee composed of some really very distinguished scholars on civics and civic education from around the country. We want our research to help people understand the rules so that we communicate with each other more effectively. We don't all have to agree about policies and laws, but we do need to live in the same reality. As I said earlier, I used to be a lawyer. I really am over that, but still. So let me leave you with an example of what I mean by living in the same reality. During trials, lawyers for the parties, the contending parties, will often stipulate to the facts. That means that they agree that such and such happened, or they agree upon a particular description of the issues that are being tried. They can strenuously disagree about the implications to be drawn from those facts. They can agree, for example, that the car ran the red light, but then disagree about why that happened. Maybe because there was oil on the pavement, or the driver was texting. They can disagree whether the accident was the cause of the other driver's injury, or whether she'd fallen off a roof the day before. If we all understand our own history and Constitution, the basic facts that everyone credible has agreed about, our own rules, we can then argue about the proper application of those rules to a changing world. It's like football or baseball. We need to know the rules in order to argue whether the referee or umpire applied them properly. You know, I mean, I can sit down and argue with somebody that whether the Establishment Clause permits or prohibits the teaching of X, Y, Z in the public schools. We can have that discussion. There are lots of shades of gray, and it can be a productive argument. But it's only productive if we both understand what the Establishment Clause is, we both understand where it came from and what it was intended to do. If we're sitting there and I come from the position that all of the founders were deists and none of them cared about religion at all, and the other party to that discussion comes to it believing that the notion of separation of church and state was something made up by the ACLU, which a lot of people evidently do think, then we're not going to have a productive debate. So the whole point of civic literacy is to bring people into into a common reality in a world where anymore we don't, everybody doesn't watch I Love Lucy and then argue about it the next day at the water cooler. We don't all pick up newspapers of general circulation. I would argue we don't really have a newspaper in Indianapolis anymore, and come across similar headlines. And even if all you wanted to do was pick up that paper and look at the sports, at least you had to go past the other headlines. These ways in which we existed in a common reality are long gone in an increasingly fragmented world where we can all construct our own filter bubbles, as the book of the same name suggests. We can all sort of curate the information that we get so that it is consistent with our preconceptions, and we no longer live in the same reality. That makes it very difficult to have a productive conversation. If I say those are chairs and you say those are tables, we are just not going to have a very good discussion about its proper use. And so at the Center for Civic Literacy, we are looking into why are we so illiterate? What is the cause of this civic deficit? What can we do about it? And the last thing I will say is that one of our major goals is to make people aware that the consequences of what I call the civic deficit, which I would argue is a lot more important than the fiscal deficit, the consequence of that is to make us, it is to fragment our country and make it increasingly difficult to construct public policies that deal with our problems. And that's what I'm doing these days.